University of California, Irvine. He's an expert in user modeling, personalization, and privacy. And he's also the editor of user modeling, right? And user-adapter interaction.
Yeah, thank you very much. My talk is about data mining and privacy, but not in the sense of preserving users' privacy while mining the data, but rather using data mining as a tool for improving users' privacy. So very similar to Yuval's talk before. Originally I planned to describe personalization to you, because that's where I come from, and that's where privacy problems start. But Nia from Microsoft explained in the morning how they integrate all sorts of recommender systems into Xbox. Here, I believe, from Google explained personalized search in Google, where the search history is taken into account for delivering targeted search results. And Ido from IBM explained the integration of various personalization methods in IBM internal software. So this became redundant. This slide shows various studies over the past 15 years that show that personalization delivers benefits both for users and for providers of personalization. But Nia also discussed that 60% of Netflix movies are being watched as a result of personalization, and even more so, 20 to 30% of Amazon purchases are the result of personalized recommendations. So personalization is a very powerful technique, obviously, and seemingly also a very profitable technique. So since this became redundant at the end of this day, let's focus on the downsides of personalization. And arguably the single most important downside of personalization in these days is that personalized systems collect significantly more personal data about users than ordinary computer systems, and also that this is being done in an inconspicuous manner. So people don't realize that Google, that Amazon tracks everything that they are doing. And this is a problem because this raises privacy concerns. There is an enormous level of privacy concern nowadays. These are the latest data from the US. So currently, 91% of US adults worry about their privacy online. 53% of US adults do not completely trust businesses keep their personal information private, and 88% of US consumers indicate that they avoid companies that do not protect their privacy. So if you ask people, they claim very high privacy fears. And I'm now working in a small area called privacy-enhanced personalization, where researchers try to give people both good personalization and good privacy, or more operational, give optimal personalization within the constraints that privacy provides. As part of this research, we try to look at people's actual privacy behavior. So we look at what data do people actually disclose, and specifically we were interested in, do we find any regularities, commonalities in people's privacy behavior? So if this is a fictitious record of what people disclose, here's person 1 who disclosed name, social security number, and something else here. And here is person 2 who did not disclose name, did not disclose age, or did not disclose social security number, but rather other pieces of data. Is the privacy behavior of people completely random, or can we find some regularities, commonalities? Now, if we look into the literature, then researchers in the past already did find some patterns. So a very old result, intuitive result, is that it depends on the type of data. If you ask people about their favorite TV show or their favorite snack, then 80% of people will disclose what their favorite TV show or snack is. If you ask them about their favorite, ask them about their phone number or credit card number or social security number, then only very few people will disclose these pieces of information. So the type of data seemingly matters. Researchers also found fairly early that there are differences between people. So this is a very classical dichotomy dating back to Westing. Also other people found similar tripartite division among people, that there are roughly 10% people who are pretty much unconcerned about privacy. The percentage of these people shrinks slightly over time. Then there are like 25% fundamentalists who are very concerned about privacy. Also this percentage shrinks slightly over time. And the vast majority are privacy pragmatists who kind of make a decision about disclosing or not disclosing information on very pragmatic terms. So it also depends on the person. And then if you look very carefully in the literature, you sometimes find results like, oh, by the way, in my study, females disclosed their contact data and their gender less frequently than males. Or that the researcher found not only those fundamentalists and the unconcerned that I just described, but also one group of people that is very identity concerned, so who did not give out name, address, email frequently, and another group that is more profiling concerned, so who is reluctant to give out information about interests, hobbies, health, or other personal information. And this is a kind of interaction between type of information and people. Also, if you look carefully, occasionally in research you find subgroups of people who have a specific privacy behavior with respect to certain types of data. And we were curious whether this is just accidental happenings. There are hundreds of studies being made over the past 20 years, or whether there is a stronger pattern in this. And so we conducted experiments and also got outside data and looked into this data more carefully. In one experiment, we pretended that users would work with an app recommender, so an Android app that would recommend apps to install on their Android devices. And we told people, tell this app about yourself so that the app can make better app recommendations to you. And we asked them, for instance, maybe track your location. And people could say yes, no, and could also indicate the level of granularity. Or people could ask, or we ask people, maybe you know your household income, and people could indicate the bracket household income, or not. So they got 31 questions, and we were curious whether we could find some questions for which people showed similar disclosure behavior. And to find this out, we've performed factor analysis and found that those questions loaded on two main factors. And one we called more context data. That's data about people's usage of the Android device, like the location of usage, the apps they have currently running. So that's been called context data in the area of recommender systems. And the other factor is demographics data. So the amount of TV watching, what kind of data plan they had, gender, age, education. So that's two main factors that we identified. Here you see the factor loadings and those items that did not load very well, we excluded in our analysis. Then we did cluster analysis based on the disclosure of context and demographic data, the factors that we had identified in the first step. We found that 4 factors would be the best solution. And we looked at the, actually 4 clusters, and we looked at the amount of disclosure of these 4 clusters of people. And we found that there is one group that discloses a lot. So these are simply the unconcerned that have been found in the past. The fundamentalists that disclose very little. Then a small group in between. And then an interesting group that was reluctant to disclose context data, so about where they are, what they currently do, but pretty much unconcerned about the disclosure of demographic data. So this kind of was interesting, A, that we could identify people with very different disclosure behaviors, and B, that there were also interaction effects. 0 is the average disclosure rate, and +1, -1 is standard deviation, plus or minus in disclosure behavior. It's interesting. Now we looked a little bit further. Can we find other characteristics that describe these clusters that we found? And we found that mobile internet usage correlates in an interesting manner with these clusters. So the green group here, the very high mobile internet usage. So if you use the internet frequently, then you are likely to be in a group that discloses a lot about themselves. If you use internet rarely, then you are likely to be in a group that discloses little about themselves. The lines between those averages indicate that the difference is not statistically significant. So this opens a perspective that we might be able to predict people's disclosure behavior based on other characteristics on their internet usage. And we found that also other characteristics of users might be predictors, weak predictors, and that we might be able to combine several predictors to make accurate predictions. We did another study where we asked people how likely would they disclose 24 pieces of personal information to an online retailer. And we again did an exploratory factor analysis and identified that people's disclosure behavior can be described best with 4 factors. One concerns the disclosure of health data, another the disclosure of interests, work-related data, and contact information. Another cluster analysis and found that, again, 4 clusters provided an optimal solution. And those are clusters that have very different disclosure behaviors with regard to different types of personal data. So we find one cluster that discloses lots of information about themselves, the green one, except for contact information for some reason. We find the opposite cluster, no disclosure here, but quite willing to give out contact information. Also, and then we have 2 other clusters here, somewhere in the middle, again with fairly different disclosure behaviors. And we looked again at other characteristics that kind of are correlated with these groups. And we found that age might be an interesting predictor. People are young, then they are likely to be in this purple cluster here. If people are older, then they are more likely to be in this cluster here. And here the double arrows mean the difference is statistically significant. So again, it might be possible to predict people's privacy behavior based on their age. Then we took an outside data set about disclosure on Facebook and did the same and found factors like Facebook activity, location, contact information, and information about life and interests. And also did a cluster analysis, and this time we found 5 clusters. It's hard to see, but again we find a privacy concerned group here, privacy unconcerned group here, and then we find 2 very strange clusters, blue and purple, who are pretty much identical in their disclosure behavior, except that one group is very willing to disclose Facebook activity, whereas the other is not very willing to disclose this kind of information about themselves. And here we did not find objective characteristics correlated well, but we found that certain attitudes correlated well with group membership, cluster membership. One was trusted Facebook, and the other one whether Facebook must ask for permission. So knowing people's attitude with regard to these 2 questions is a pretty good indicator for being able to predict their disclosure behavior. So if these trends in finding people, groups with different disclosure behavior continues, then we might really be able to come up with predictors about people's disclosure behavior. That's nice, but why is this important? It's important because currently there seems to be a kind of privacy protection paradox. If you ask people how they want to protect their privacy, then you hear assertions very much like, I'm the best person to protect my privacy, and I want it, I'm able to protect my privacy. Privacy laws increasingly require people to protect their privacy themselves. But, on the other hand, there are many studies around that show that people are actually unable to protect their privacy, and in practice don't do it. So there's a paradox between claims that people make about themselves, requirements that privacy laws impose, and what people are really able to do. So, to prove it, if you ask people, 60% say, I'm the best to protect my privacy, much better than privacy, legal privacy regulation, than certification authorities that inspect the privacy, etc. So people are very self-confident. Here you have upcoming privacy legislation in the US, pushed by the White House, and you see that people are required to control their privacy, and that websites are being required to disclose everything about that helps people with their privacy decisions. However, it's very difficult to control one's own privacy. Facebook allows you to control your privacy, but their options have been called bewildering, tangled, labyrinthian, and studies have shown that if you ask people what they intend to do with privacy controls and what they really did, that there's a wide gap between. So people are kind of unable to use those controls properly. Also, privacy control presumes that people are able to do kind of rational decision making, but this is not the case. Many studies have shown that if you ask more privacy-sensitive things first, then people will disclose more about themselves than if you start with less privacy things. So it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but this is how it is. If you tell people, if you give them information about privacy, they will get privacy fears and disclose less. So privacy information raises fears and acts counterproductive. People can easily ignore privacy notices if it's misplaced in the workflow. If you tell people about privacy on professionally designed websites, this raises privacy fears. If you tell people about privacy on unprofessionally designed websites, then this doesn't really matter. Again, counterintuitive results, but this is how people react. So people are not very good decision makers with regard to privacy. And therefore, now there's a new line in privacy research that one should not put the onus on people with regard to their privacy, but rather help people, nudge people a little bit by appropriate defaults, by reminders, by rewards. And this direction, unfortunately, is marred by the fact that people have different privacy preferences, and as we saw with the data that I presented, there are groups of people that have different privacy preferences. And now comes the approach that you take this into account, and in an HCI approach, I come more from HCI, one would first conduct user studies try to find user groups with different privacy behaviors.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. The problem is serious. The problem is very, very clear. On the other hand, the companies that are collecting data, their goal is obviously to collect as much data as they can. So do you see any software solutions that would help users to really tune the level of privacy, private data that they disclose?
Yeah, so this gives the perspective of such a method. So either a machine learning driven or an HCI experiment driven classification of people, and then new users are being assigned to one or possibly more than one of the discovered privacy groups, and privacy preferences are kind of set for them as a default. And this would, on the one hand, relieve users from having to specify preferences for each and every piece of information about themselves, and on the other hand, still give them the chance to slightly correct default preferences if they want to correct them, which very few users, of course, will do.
Could their preference be harmful for them?
We cannot exclude it, of course. So harmful, we don't know. They might be dissatisfied, but they have the opportunity to look at the preferences that have been specified for them and to correct them.
Thank you.